And we're live on Rockfin. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you're new, I want to let you know that Sab's podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesday, Thursday, and Fridays, and you can catch me here Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sundays. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And I believe my guest is here. Peter, whenever you're ready, if you give me a thumbs up, I'll go ahead and let you into the stream. All right, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
All right, nice to meet you too. My special guest tonight is Peter Winslow. He is a volunteer with the Philly Public Bank Coalition. Peter, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Nice to be here.
Okay, so we've been talking about public banks on this show quite a bit, actually. Roger Meadows, friend of the show, he's been educating me about that. And I hear there is an initiative that's happening in Philly. Can you please start off with explaining to everyone what is the difference between a public bank and the banks that we have now, like these privatized banks? What's the difference? And then we'll get into the actual coalition efforts in Philadelphia.
Well, Sabrina, the difference is really fundamental. It's the difference between a company, a financial institution that exists to profit the shareholders or exists to benefit the community as a whole. A public bank is there to benefit the entire community, not to line the pockets of individual shareholders.
Okay, and so the Philly Public Bank Coalition, I do want to go ahead and bring this up on the stream for just a second. Here's the website here, Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition. Eric, if you have a moment, if you can put the link to this in the chat so everyone can look at this on their own time as well. But could you tell everyone a little bit about this coalition? Like, why was this coalition created and what are you trying to get accomplished here in Philly?
Well, public banks aren't new in the world, and they're not really new in the United States. But when the financial system imploded and we were on the brink of international disaster back in the end of the Bush administration, 2008, and people saw how close we came to that disaster, a lot of people started thinking about what can we do to prevent this? What's wrong with our society, with our system, specifically our financial system, that we created this situation, allowed it to continue, and what can we do to correct the situation? And so people thinking about it for a couple of years after that came together in 2011 in Philadelphia for a national conference to talk about the potential for a solution to some of these problems that could be offered by a public bank. We looked at the example that had been set by the Bank of North Dakota, which was founded in 1919 and survived the financial crisis, performed extremely well, had great recovery for the people and the businesses in North Dakota. And why was that? We took a look at what it was about North Dakota and the Bank of North Dakota that made it different from all the other banks in the country. And the answer was really right in front of us, that the Bank of North Dakota was a public bank, and at the time, the only public bank that was in existence in the United States.
That's right, because North Dakota, during the '08 housing crisis, North Dakota didn't have to struggle as much as other states. They did have that public bank. They've also been able to implement certain policies in North Dakota and not have to ask the question, how are we going to pay for it? Because they do have that public bank. In reference to Philadelphia, I think this would be really great in a city like Philly. I know that we've talked about on this show having like a state public bank, but you can also start with just trying to have a public bank in a city as well. That actually might be an easier task to complete instead of trying to go on the state level, so to speak. What are some of the needs you would say in reference to Philadelphia for the people in the community there with the public bank?
Well, Philadelphia, of course, is a lot different from North Dakota. The economy is different. They have a lot of space and not a lot of people. They've got maybe a third to half of the number of people that we have in Philadelphia, and their problems are different. So it's not a one-for-one replication that takes place, and depending upon where you are in the country, a state public bank may be an easier lift than a city public bank, or not. In Pennsylvania, we have a Republican-dominated legislature, where the likelihood, we've been working at the state level as well to form a public bank, but it's very difficult to get traction there. In Philadelphia, we have some advantages. One is that Philadelphia and Pittsburgh have a home rule charter. So there are many things that the city can do of its own right based upon its charter, without having to go to the state for permission. So that's one of the reasons that we are focused on our Philadelphia effort more than our state effort.
Well, there's a video here I want to play that's also on your website, and it's called Public Banking Sweeps Across the Country. So I want to play a little bit of this here.
It's a beautiful day to talk about public banking.
All across the country, from Maine to Hawaii, Alaska to Florida, California to New York, people are taking back their power from Wall Street by calling for public banks.
We want New York City to take our public dollars out of those banks. Yeah. We want New York City to put that money in a public bank.
Why do we need to have to go to Wall Street about our basic needs and necessities of life?
Enter public banking, a bank owned by our local government.
All across the country, public banking movements are rising. From Los Angeles to San Francisco to Seattle to Washington, D.C., the state of New Jersey, the state of Michigan, to New York City and Alexandria's home state. We are witnessing the emergence of an idea whose time has come.
Yes.
Ever since Ellen Brown reintroduced the idea of public banking to the United States in 2011, the idea has inspired more and more people.
So it would behoove our state and local governments to set up their own banks right now, just if only to keep their deposits safe and leverage your funds into credit for your local community.
Imagine a bank whose sole purpose is to make sure that the economy is stronger. That's what a public bank can do. Traditionally, the city of Chicago pays hundreds of millions of dollars in fees and fines and interest rates to traditional financial institutions. And we have to wonder, what is the return on that investment? A public bank actually recirculates dollars back into the city's economy. With a public bank, there is accountability and there's transparency.
I think that piece is very important, making sure that the money is circled or cycled back into the community, and then also having some type of accountability, because I think we all saw, like, obviously with the '08 housing crisis, there seemed to be no accountability with these central banks like Wells Fargo. So this is one of the reasons why I really like the idea of public banking, because I feel like there is more accountability there as well, Peter. And I think that when you look at communities like Philadelphia, also like Boston, it was pointed out to me by another guest that a lot of the predominantly Black neighborhoods in Boston don't either have a bank at all or have very few. So the people have to either travel outside the community to do their banking, or they end up going to check cashing places to cash in. And that's, that's a predatory service there as well.
Yes, and a lot of our communities, the inner city communities of Black and Brown, Latino immigrant communities that are underbanked or unbanked. One of the things that we can do to address that is to have a public bank that has that as an interest. But even beyond that, we give all of our money, our tax dollars that go into the city and the state government. We give that money to the Wall Street banks, and the Wall Street banks take our money that comes from us locally and invest it in whatever gives them the best return from around the world. Their interest is a financial one. So if that means that drilling for oil in Indonesia is going to provide profit for Chase Manhattan Bank, that's where they're going to put their money, not back into the community. There is a law, the Community Reinvestment Act, where banks are supposed to support their local communities. But we look at the experience of the banks under the Community Reinvestment Act, and it's really dismal. They really have not been doing what they're supposed to be doing, and what under the law, and what they've been promising to doing. Redlining practices continue. I mean, it's really disgraceful what's been going on, and we feel that that local control, having the stakeholders, people in the community, have a say over what the policies and the programs are of our bank, our public bank and institution, is a much more satisfying way to go, so that we won't have all these gaps in the availability of credit and the disparities that take place under the current system.
Well said. Do you feel, in reference to public banking, you feel that this is something that people that have different political ideologies can get behind? Like, do you feel this is something that could have bipartisan support?
I think it could. I think it should. Ellen Brown was in the film clip that you just showed, and I was in a meeting of the Public Banking Institute earlier today, talking with Ellen, and we were talking about what happened today. Today, the Silicon Valley Bank failed, is taken over by the Federal Deposit Insurance Company today because of a run that took place. We have huge potential problems, the same kind of problems that caused the disaster or the near disaster back in 2008. They still exist. We have an overhang of derivatives, and there's a fragility to the banking system where the existence of public banks would support the sustainability of the overall financial system, would improve the functioning of the overall financial system. That's something that should not be a red and blue issue.
I agree 100%. If we wanted to start a coalition like this in our own cities, how would we start? Because I know at least there are some of us here in the Boston area that would like to get an effort going. How do you feel would be the best way to start? And could you please describe the process that your coalition has implemented?
Wow. Massachusetts has a public banking movement and is making progress in its direction. But that doesn't preclude Boston from having its own bank, which could be a regional bank, as well as one that's specifically to the city of Boston. In Philadelphia, we have been working on this for quite a while now, over a decade. And we were very fortunate to have a champion on city council who had a banking background and who understood what the problem was. He was one of the people who was just shown in that film clip, Derek Green, who's now running for mayor of Philadelphia. So the first step is to get some political allies. I think that's extremely important.
We have one of those already. Because Senator Jamie Eldridge, he was here. He actually has the Massachusetts public banking bill. It hasn't been voted on because it doesn't have the majority support, at least in the state house. But we do already have one of those in reference to having someone that's a political ally to get behind it. But for those of you watching, and I mentioned this to Senator Eldridge as well, I also think that you should reach out to Mayor Wu, Michelle Wu, the Boston mayor, to see if you can get her on board as well, because she is, I've had criticisms of her, but she's had some pretty big wins recently. And one of them I'm going to cover tonight as well. But I think like the more you have, the better chance I think that it could actually happen.
Building coalitions within the powers that be, within the government, is really important. And building coalitions among people. The folks who will benefit most from the public bank are the people who are involved in the progressive movements for the justice issues, for racial justice and gender justice and environmental justice, and to support the underfunded needs of the populace for health, education, transportation, and also to have shared prosperity within the community, so that there's support for minority-owned small businesses, for cooperative development, for the minority and immigrant communities. So, all of these sectors of the economy that have particular difficulties in obtaining financing on fair terms, they're all natural allies of the public bank movement. Housing is a major area.
That's a big one. I want to play a little bit more of this clip here.
Officials and advocates now realize it makes much more sense to cut out the Wall Street middleman by owning their own bank.
So some people say, why do we need a public bank? Let's be very clear. Private corporations are not meant to do the business of public good, which is why we need a public bank.
One of the bills that I want to draw particular attention is my bill to create a publicly owned State Bank of Washington. So the state of Washington's bank account is at the Bank of America. We have a better use for our resources. Why don't we create our own publicly owned bank, owned by us, the taxpayers, and then we can keep our tax money in Washington State and working for Washington State.
So one of the things I did not know before I saw this video clip, Peter, is how many like local or state politicians that were on board with this. Like Senator Eldridge was the only one that I knew of, and that's because, he's right here with me in Massachusetts. But I didn't realize you have New Jersey, you have Washington State, you have politicians in California that want to do this as well. So I think it's really important for people that are watching, especially if you live in any of these states. I recommend contacting these representatives that are on board for this.
And also the squad at the national level. And your Presley, your member of the squad, is one of the sponsors of a federal bill to establish a public bank. There's also a movement for a national infrastructure bank to help restore our deferred maintenance and all the neglect that's occurred to our infrastructure. The work that the Biden administration has done, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act and the American Recovery Act, the infrastructure, all these things are helpful, but the amount of unfunded infrastructure projects has been calculated to be $5 trillion and $390 billion over 10 years is not going to get there.
Right. Let's go on.
A big believer in something called the public bank. So here's the idea. All those deposits come on home. They reside in the People's Bank of New Jersey, owned by the citizens.
We don't need Washington to form a public bank. You can do it here. The state can do it. States, cities, counties, all across America can do this.
With a public bank, a city or state can extend credit to themselves at low interest rates, pay themselves back, and keep the profits in the community.
By borrowing money at a fraction of what we borrow it at now, that would really be of the biggest help.
When the crash hit, the Bank of North Dakota never blinked, and the credit kept flowing. We can go toe-to-toe with the big boys.
I think that money should be a public utility, not a means of further consolidating wealth.
The idea is motivating. Since 2017, over 26 states and municipalities have introduced new public bank legislation.
So I didn't realize that as well. Over 26 states and municipalities. So people, if you're watching and you see your state appear, seriously, like contact your representatives. And then another thing is like, we have to increase the conversation about this, because honestly, before Roger Meadows reached out to me, I was not aware of this at all.
Yeah, public education is an uphill battle, but there is a lot that is happening, a lot that's taken place. California passed a bill, HB 857, which calls for or allows for the establishment of 10 municipal banks within California. And so San Francisco and the East Bay and San Jose and Los Angeles, different municipalities are working within that framework to try to put together a structure that will be acceptable under that legislation to form a bank. There are advances on many fronts. The Territorial Bank of American Samoa was established because the bank that had been serving the people on that island from Hawaii pulled out and would leave the entire territory unbanked without any ability to process checks. So they rapidly formed a public bank, and it took 2 years, but they established a relationship with the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So they're up and running. That is a precedent that other public banks can follow in forming relationships with the Federal Reserve. So but it's complicated, and this is a big lift. It's a game-changing lift, so it's worth it, but it's a very big lift.
Well said.
More than 50 grassroots groups are working across the country.
So today we are dropping 1,200 pages of signatures. We've got 40,000 signatures in support in this motion, and that we want to move towards a public banking system that is for the 99%.
Carlos, what are you doing?
Hey! I'm live streaming, folks.
Yeah!
Hey!
Yes, on zombie.
Yes, on zombie.
Yes, zombie.
In California, over 150 organizations in over a dozen major cities and counties have voted to support the Public Banking Act, AB 857, which makes it possible for cities to set up their own public banks. Through the hard work of advocates and sponsors, the bill has passed the Assembly and 2 Senate committees. News outlets are paying attention. This success has inspired New York State to introduce a similar bill, S 5565, giving New York's cities a pathway to their own public banks. Join the movement. Go to publicbankinginstitute.org.
Yes, so everyone go to publicbankinginstitute.org so you can join on for this as well. And they mentioned California. And for those who are not aware, something big happened in California today in reference to the banking system. You mentioned it earlier, Peter, the Silicon Valley Bank, which apparently is the largest bank, I believe, in California. So they are already saying that this is the second largest collapse in the banking industry since 2008. So you guys see what's happening with a lot of these privatized banks. We really need to detach ourselves from the central banking system.
Yeah, the Bank of America is really the largest bank, and Wells Fargo is in the running as well. So the Silicon Valley Bank is not the largest, but it's fairly substantial. And it was the engine for a lot of the tech innovation that took place.
Yep.
But it shows how fragile the system is when there's a change. Like the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates, and the Silicon Bank was caught short. And when their depositors and the people who held claims against them put a run on the bank, they could not keep up, and so they collapsed.
That's right, and we have a clip of that here because for me, I'm starting to get '08 vibes again. So I want people to understand that this is serious. Let me go ahead. I'm going to play a little bit of this here. The announcement was made today. Silicon Valley Bank collapse is the second largest bank failure in the United States.
A major development in the banking world. The FDIC just reported that California regulators shut down Silicon Valley Bank, a big lender out in California, after reporting a loss of over $1 billion. There were fears of a run on this bank. People wondering if they should have PTSD into 2008. What's going on here?
Yeah, this really is an earthquake, especially for the tech community. Silicon Valley Bank dropped by 60% yesterday alone. We just learned today that California regulators have shut this lender down. This is the biggest failure since 2008. It's actually the second biggest failure ever since Washington Mutual in September of 2008. This is a major lender to tech startups. The FDIC says that insured depositors, they will have full access to insured deposits by Monday.
I just want to mention this part as well, Peter. I'm not sure if you're aware, but the tech industry actually just had a lot of layoffs. I know Google laid off thousands of people, Facebook as well. So this is no one's job is safe. Let's just put it that way.
Yes. Well, it also, since this is a primary lender for tech startups, the fact that they are no longer in business means that it's very, very difficult for tech startups now in California and elsewhere to get the funding that they need. So so an industry that is an engine of economic viability and vitality has really suffered.
That's right.
Monday morning. Insured deposits, that means up to $250,000. Of course, we know that some small businesses, some startups, some individuals, they have more than that $250,000. It's not clear if they're going to get all of their money back. This, of course, is not sitting well in the marketplace. We see the Dow is down by more than 250 points. Banks are leading the way lower. The good news here is that experts that I'm talking to, they are hopeful that this is an isolated incident, that this is not part of a broader systemic issue. Mark Zandi, he told me, he's the chief economist over at Moody's Analytics, he just told me that he doesn't think that this failure is symptomatic of a broader problem in the banking industry. Let's hope not, because that's the last thing we need right now.
Yeah, the major banks are saying that they are well capitalized. Matt Egan, thank you.
Robert Reich, former U.S. Labor Secretary under President Clinton, is with us now. Also the author of The System, Who Rigged It and How We Fix It. Secretary Reich, always good to have you. Let's start where Matt ended with this Silicon Valley Bank. The FDIC now in control. We saw that there were some stumbles from Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, other banks trading. Theirs halted yesterday. What does this mean for people outside of the Silicon Valley Bank universe? What does this mean for the average borrower, if anything?
Before he answers that question, Peter, the FDIC, what is their role here in reference to banking, and why is this significant?
The FDIC provides insurance. But their insurance is limited for the first $250,000 of any depositor's account. So this failure is affecting those who have more than $250,000. So if you have some money in the bank under $250,000, the FDIC will stand behind it. Even if your bank were to fail, your money would be safe. However, there is such a vast overhang of derivatives, trillions of dollars of derivatives, that the amount of money that the FDIC has, the FDIC is an insurance program, so they get payments from their member banks. But the amount of money that they have is very, very small compared to the total obligations that all the institutions that they insure have. So the amount of money that's available to the FDIC could be overwhelmed. At that point, perhaps the United States Treasury would step in. But the Dodd-Frank Act, and I don't know if Robert Reich is going to get into the weeds that far, but the Dodd-Frank Act, where there was a bailout of the banks that people were really upset about because the little guys were left holding the bag and all the banks, the big guys, got bailed out. The Dodd-Frank provision was to end future bailouts. And it said to the banks, in the future, if you run into a problem, we're not gonna bail you out. You have to bail in, which means you have to go to your depositors who are treated from a legal standpoint as creditors of the bank, unsecured creditors of the bank, and convert their credit position into an equity position, which means that their position becomes illiquid. And that bail-in would be the same destructive force that we had back in 2008.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, let's hear what he says about this.
So far, it doesn't mean anything, but the big question is one of contagion. That is, what we saw in 2008 was when one big bank and a couple of others started to fail, could not pay their depositors, could not actually pay up what they owed. They were closed, and regulators had to move in very, very quickly. But we ended up with a financial crisis because, one big banking card easily starts tipping over other cards. It's a house of cards. Now, we don't know yet about contagion. What we do know is that this bank was obviously overextended. And this is related to the Fed because as interest rates went up and this bank was lending to a lot of startups, this bank simply could not handle it. I think that this is the biggest economic news today. It is not this jobs report. The jobs report was good, and it's kind of signals to me a soft landing. But I think that in terms of what the Fed is going to do, this bank implosion, this potential contagion may reverse Jerome Powell's direction. It may lead to, instead of a 0.5 point increase at the March meeting, it may lead to no increase at all. In fact, it's even conceivable that interest rates start dropping. The fear that we're going to be in deep trouble.
So, Peter, a quick question. When he says that this bank basically got to the point where they couldn't pay their depositors, how does that happen? Like, how does a bank get to that point?
Well, they were in a long position. So they had, because our interest rates were so low for so long, they had invested in long-term bonds, government bonds and other bonds at relatively low interest rates. So the returns that their investors, their depositors were getting were good for the time, but when the interest rates shifted, they were caught with a long position at relatively low interest rates when interest rates have now gone up because of the actions of the Federal Reserve. People said, I can get a better return somewhere else. I'm going to take my money out of the Silicon Valley Bank and put it somewhere else so I can get a higher return. And that was the nature of the run that took place.
Interesting. This is a scary time. I have a question in reference to ballot measures because Massachusetts, like we are a ballot initiative state. I don't think Pennsylvania is not, but I think you might be able to amend your state constitution. But what do you think about the idea of trying to establish a public bank through a ballot measure? In other words, having this question on the ballot where the voters would decide whether or not they wanted a public bank. What do you think about that idea?
We have thought for a long time about ballot initiatives, and we don't need that at a state level because we have a ballot initiative process that can take place at the city level under our home rule charter. So we have looked at that. They are time-consuming and expensive. What we were able to do in Philadelphia was use an existing law, which is Act 102 in Pennsylvania. It's the Economic Development Finance Law. And under that Economic Development Finance Law, there are provisions to set up authorities. And so using that law of the state and the Home Rule Charter, we were able to get enacted an ordinance in the city of Philadelphia, March 17th of last year, to establish the Philadelphia Public Financial Authority as a precursor to the creation of a public bank. Public bank is not a revolving fund. A public bank has the ability to do fractional reserve banking, which means that that's how money is made. It's really the authorization from the government to make money by giving out loans, creating money through those loans out of thin air, right? That's what banks do. And that's what we want to be able to do as a public bank. A revolving fund does not have that capacity. But what we have chosen to do in Philadelphia is first establish a financial authority and put in place the governance structure, the programs and the policies for transparency and openness and inclusion and shareholder interest, all of the values that we want to support, and to put that into play as a proof of concept as a revolving fund, which is what the financial authority would be, and have a mandate of the financial authority to do two things. One, to qualify as a community development financial institution, a CDFI. And the second is to create a public bank, which means obtaining a bank charter from the state. In Pennsylvania, that's from the Pennsylvania Department of Banking and Securities, who we've had conversations with. So
do you feel
our approach is a two-step approach based on working through our city council. So we succeeded. We got the legislation passed. It's the law in Philadelphia. Our current mayor has refused to implement the law. To implement the law, he has to appoint the initial board of directors, and then the city solicitor can file with the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania to incorporate the authority. Okay? But the mayor refuses to do that. We are currently in a political season where we have a primary on May 16th, and we are working now to have all of the mayoral candidates, all of the controller candidates, all the city council candidates go on record as not only supporting the public bank, but the implementation of the financial authority as the first step to creating the public bank. When the bill passed in council, it passed 16-1, and the mayor did not veto it. The mayor just refused to implement the law.
Wow. This is really interesting. So who's the gentleman you said that's running for mayor in Philly that approves of it?
All of the candidates, one is a little bit on the fence, but all of the candidates for mayor have indicated their support for the financial authority and for the public bank. Several of the candidates, Derek Green, who is our champion in the legislation that was passed last year, Helen Gim, Maria Canon Sanchez, Alan Dome, Sherelle Parker. These are all people who were formerly on city council who are running for mayor. They all voted for the legislation. So we're very hopeful that our next mayor will go through and implement the law that was passed last year.
There's something interesting happening in Philly politics. I covered a story a couple of months ago about the Philly DA that there were attempts to remove him because I guess like his view on policing, he's wanting to, scale back like some of the policing and some of these mandatory minimum sentences, which I totally understand. But it does seem like there's something staring in Philadelphia politics right now, it seems like.
Yes, there's a lot happening in Philadelphia politics, and our district attorney, Larry Krasner, has done some innovative things. He has created a data lab that has been looking at the information, not only in terms of the crime statistics, but correlation of the crime statistics with historic redlining, current lending practices, education levels, childhood asthma rates, and so on, mapping where all this takes place. And it's not terribly surprising that it all falls down into the inner city Black communities that face all of this. So we're taking, and the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition is a member of the 57 Block Initiative, which is that undertaking of the district attorney with the Black clergy in Philadelphia to address gun violence as a systemic problem, not by more harsher draconian policing, but by addressing the underlying problems that give rise to the destabilization of these inner city communities.
That's right. And one of the things I want to say to people too, I would really like to see this really take off in Philly, because I think other cities will become inspired. Like Baltimore's not far from Philly. My family's from Baltimore. I can see people in Baltimore saying, did you know that Philly just passed like a public bank? Maybe we should try to organize and get that accomplished here in Baltimore. Because for people who are not aware, like if you go into particularly Black inner city communities, it is a problem in the sense that the banks, for the most part, are not there. And so what happens is that you have a lot of these payday lender stores on different corners. You also have the check cashing places like Western Union. Like they'll have a lot of those facilities, but those places, again, like I said, they're predatory. The fee is ridiculous. And so it kind of keeps people, where they are. It's like most people may not have the means or the resources to travel outside their community just to go to the bank, right? So it's just, there's not enough investment in those communities. And I would really like to see a public bank really like take off.
Yes, well, those problems are systemic. When you look into them, there's a problem of a lack of intergenerational wealth that's been accumulated as a result of policies, government policies, business policies that have made it impossible for Black families and Black communities to build intergenerational wealth. So as a result, it's difficult to have the collateral necessary for a loan. Those are the kinds of problems that the public bank and our financial authority will address head on by saying, what is the problem here? What is the limitation? How can we change that game? And we think we can through a partnership model with other financial institutions.
Have you had a chance to speak to anyone from the Bank of North Dakota?
Yes, I went out to North Dakota a while back, and I toured the state from one end to the other to talk to people and to see what the impact was of the Bank of North Dakota. And a lot of the people in North Dakota, they really weren't thinking about or aware that they had the only public bank in the country. But everybody that I spoke to knew about their college loan program. In North Dakota, anybody who is a resident of North Dakota can go to college or postgraduate work anywhere in the world and get a loan, a low interest loan from the Bank of North Dakota. And anybody from anywhere in the world can come to study in North Dakota and get a loan from the Bank of North Dakota. When the pandemic hit, the first thing that the Bank of North Dakota did is they put a moratorium on loan repayments for the student loan program. These are not usurious loans. These are loans that people can actually live with and pay back. It's a terrific program, and everybody that I spoke to, business people, waitresses in the diner, everybody knew about that program, in part because it was part of their education curriculum for themselves and their families when they were going through school, and they had taken out a loan, or someone in their family had. Everybody knew about and loved that particular program. So there are wonderful successes that I was able to identify on the ground from the grassroots up, and the way in which the Bank of North Dakota is able to serve its people.
That is amazing. I had a friend that moved to North Dakota a couple years ago, and it was just really random. Moved there from North Carolina, and I was like, "Why did you move to North Dakota?" And he told me, he said, because he got a job offer there that paid a lot, apparently. And he said, in North Dakota, they have more jobs than people. He lived there for a couple of years, saved up all of his money, and apparently his rent was very cheap too. And then he moved back to North Carolina and he bought a house. So something's working out well in North Dakota.
Well, there was a horrendous flood on the Red River, which runs between North Dakota and Minnesota. And it just flooded out towns on both sides of the river. You've got town in one state, town in another state, a bridge that connects them. So they're sort of the same town, but they're in two different jurisdictions. So they both got hammered by the flood, but North Dakota, because the support of the Bank of North Dakota, was able to rebuild, recover, have a thriving economy where, and I saw this with my eyes, where on the other side of the river, they were still struggling to recover from this physical disaster. And with climate disruption going to affect, Boston and, Philadelphia and every place else, the ability to have resilience and have financial resilience to be able to help people recover from these and to prevent and to mitigate and all these things, everything requires money. And that's something that we're planning to do in Philadelphia, through the public bank and the financial authority.
All right. So Peter, before you head out, how can people support your efforts?
Well, we're happy to support everybody else's efforts because we feel that this is really a national movement. I'm happy to work with folks in other jurisdictions, as are my colleagues. Right now, we need moral support more than anything else. But a success in one place is a success in every place for us. So I would suggest not only contacting the Philadelphia Public Banking Coalition, but also the Public Banking Institute, because they are orchestrating the national movement.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys, I hope you learned something there tonight. A lot of information. I told you guys I wanted to talk more about public banking. There's actually another gentleman that reached out to me as well that wants to come on to talk about public banking. So you're going to be hearing about this for quite a bit. I hope that's okay with you. I hope that is okay. I'm going to get to some of these comments, and then we're going to shout out patrons, and we're going to get into our other news stories. But I got to tell you that Silicon Valley Bank collapse, that's not a little thing. That is not a small thing. So I've been keeping my ear to the ground. Elizabeth says, wow, Sabby, you are really an influential voice as I look at all the amazing interviews you've done. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And thank you for the super sticker, Elizabeth Marshall. Elizabeth says, your analysis and passion are excellent. Thank you for your hard work. Norwell classmate said Matt Taibbi's family wants to live there. His dad worked at a Boston news station. Small world, keep the faith. Yeah. He's from he's from Massachusetts, the Boston area. Thank you for the super chat, Roger. Any Sabby viewers in Philly, don't re-elect Kenny. And Steve says support public banks. That's right, 100%. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin. JVB says, thanks, Sabby, for this important interview. You are welcome, JVB. All right. And I do want to give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. All right. You can see all of their names listed here. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much. I really do appreciate it. Okay. What else are we going to discuss tonight? Lots of things happen in the news. That bank story really blew my mind. That was the first thing I saw this morning. And I was like, uh-oh, I hope everybody's paying attention to this. Let's go ahead and share that thumbnail to show you what else we are going to discuss tonight. All right. Tonight, we are discussing Glenn Greenwald defends Russell Brand. What is happening to Russell Brand? You know, the people are coming after him. I'm serious. They pulled out all the stops. They're not happy with Russell Brand. We're also going to discuss Bernie Sanders picks Joe Biden. We're going to talk about this Bernie Sanders interview and, well, 2 interviews, actually. One is in reference to that. Another one is in reference to Russia, Ukraine. We're also going to discuss Mayor Wu rent news. That is a good news story. I'm really surprised that actually happened as fast as it did, to be honest, because I mentioned it. I feel like it was just a couple weeks ago. I mentioned what they were trying to accomplish. So I have an update on that. And of course, Peter was just here to talk about Philly Public Bank. So let's go ahead and get started with this Bernie Sanders story. Now, Bernie Sanders, I have 2 interviews from him. The first one, he touches on a number of different topics. The second one, he focuses primarily on the 2024 election, but he covers that in both interviews, but there's things that's said in one interview that aren't said in the other interview. So I think that you really need to hear this. You really need to hear this. And there's another breakdown I'm going to do on Sunday. I'm going to do a different type of show on Sunday. We're going to do an analysis. We're really going to analyze what has happened with the progressive movement, what has happened with these so-called progressive politicians that have come into the political space. And we are going to look at why some people are going all in for Marianne Williamson, even though they know this is not a winnable thing for her. And I'm going to break all that down. I have a lot of receipts. I have a lot of clips and things like that. I'm really going to do a deep dive about that on Sunday. But the first interview with Bernie Sanders here was with the BBC, and it says Bernie Sanders on Biden, billionaires, and mittens. We're not going to get into the mittens. I'm sorry. I don't think many people are thinking about mittens right now, considering what's going on financially. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Well, he is the president. If he runs for re-election, I will support him. I think he is in a very strong position and will likely defeat Trump. And I think that the record that he's established, the fights that he's fought, have been very important ones. And I think, unfortunately, on some of the most important issues facing the working class of America, we've had zero support from Republicans. We've had some defections from Democrats, but he has tried his best to improve life.
Let's pause there for just a second and comment on that. He said that he thinks that Biden is the best person to beat Donald Trump. Recent polls say that that's not the case. Recent polling right now shows that Trump is beating Joe Biden. Now, I'm not sure when this interview was recorded, but just to give you that update, right now, the polls show that Trump is beating Joe Biden. But why did they ask him that question? Because obviously, Marianne Williamson announced that she's also running for president. She is going to primary challenge Joe Biden. So Bernie Sanders is letting you know exactly where he stands come 2024 if Joe Biden decides to run again, that he will be supporting Joe Biden. And he's not the only one. The entire progressive caucus, we talked about this a couple nights ago, have also said that they will be supporting Joe Biden. So this is a double whammy, obviously, for Marianne Williamson, because where is she going to get that support in reference to the politicians who are already in Congress? And why am I pointing this out? Because one of Bernie Sanders' biggest policy issues is Medicare for all. Joe Biden has gone on record saying that he does not support Medicare for all. He said that if the bill came across his desk, he would veto it. Marianne Williamson does support Medicare for all. She didn't always, but that was an issue she came around on. So she's gone to the Medicare for all marches. She's been speakers at these events as well. So there is a difference in reference to that particular policy. And if Bernie Sanders is as passionate about Medicare for all as he says that he is, why is he going to support the presidential candidate who doesn't want to make it happen? These are questions you need to ask yourself. Let's go on.
Look at a couple of things before we come on to the book. You said that the US withdrawal from Afghanistan was a courageous step that we strongly support. But look at Afghanistan now. You know, girls aren't in school, women aren't in jobs, the Taliban are back, there's terrorism, there's no justice. Was that a massive mistake?
No, it wasn't. Look, it's a horrible situation. What's gone on in Afghanistan for so long has been a terrible situation. But I think the United States cannot be involved in endless wars. Not in Afghanistan, not in Iraq. The withdrawal was obviously not done as well as it should have been. But I think at the end of the day, the United States cannot be involved in the decision-making of countries all over the world.
But we are, and you've backed some of those policy decisions. And what they get wrong here, what she did mention and what he did mention, of course, he's not going to, but we talked about this a year ago. The women in Afghanistan were actually better off before U.S. intervention. The policies became more strict towards them after the United States government intervened. We pulled this up on the show. I showed you what women were allowed to wear in the 1970s before this intervention took place. They had a lot more freedom. It was after the U.S. government intervened in Afghanistan that these more strict positions, these stricter rules were put onto those women. Neither one of them are going to mention that. We should have never been there in the first place. Let's go on.
The first anniversary of the war in Ukraine is tomorrow. What President Zelensky wants is F-16s from the US and the UK. Poland are likely to be sending MiGs. Should America send F-16s?
It's not an issue that I've been heavily involved in, but I support what the president is doing. I think what Putin did was outrageous, not only for the people of the Ukraine and all the destruction, not only for the thousands and tens of thousands of Russian soldiers who have been dying. We need a world now, if we're going to combat climate change, if we're going to combat future pandemics, we need a world to come together. And Putin has radically disrupted that, and that is a real tragedy. But I think at the end of the day, the United States, NATO cannot sit back and allow Putin's aggression to go unresponded to.
If you're going to combat climate change, which is what he just mentioned, then you would not be approving wars at all. Because the military-industrial complex is the largest, single most polluter of the world. This is how you push back on these so-called progressives who say they're champions and fighters for climate change. This is how you push back on them with that issue. You ask them the war question. Ask them about that. Do they support these wars? That's how you can tell if they're serious or not about combating climate change. And Bernie Sanders knows that.
Can we turn now to your observations on Donald Trump? You're clear that you think that most of Trump's supporters weren't actually motivated by racism and bigotry. Do you think the Democrats were wrong to characterize it like that, a bit like Hillary Clinton's deplorable?
Yeah, I was. I think the deeper issue is, if you ask me, are some of Trump's supporters racist? Yes. Sexist? Yes. Homophobes? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, what's happening in the United States, and all over the world, by the way, many of the industrialized countries, is the working class is in serious trouble. People's standard of living is going down at the same time as billionaires are becoming much richer. That is what this book is about. And I think that for many decades now, what the Democratic Party has done is turn its back on the loss of good-paying jobs in the United States, the increase in poverty.
You say that billionaires in America are every bit as dangerous.
And Joe Biden is a part of that, but you said that you'll still support Joe Biden. Do you see how at the end of the day, they still just play party politics? They still go along with what the Democratic leadership wants. They go along with the party. You can say all that, Bernie Sanders. You can believe all that. But at the end of the day, you know that you are just going to go along with what the Democratic Party wants. It is really important that people don't fall for this again. Now, it has been said by Ro Khanna that if Joe Biden does not run, then Bernie Sanders will run. You can't fall for this again. He's played this game twice already, twice in a row.
Dangerous as oligarchs surrounding Vladimir Putin. But how can you justify that? Presumably, billionaires in America don't have private armies. They're not necessarily laundering billions of dollars. Who does that?
I didn't say that they were as dangerous. What I said is that in America, what we say is Russia has oligarchs. Do they? Absolutely. Is Putin part of that? Absolutely. But in America, have you heard anyone talk about oligarchy? The answer is we don't. And in the book, we make it clear that you have more concentration of ownership right now in sector after sector than we've ever had. More income and wealth inequality than we've ever had. More corporate control over the media than we have ever have. So when the rich get much richer and have incredible political power, I call that an oligarchy.
So Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates are dangerous oligarchs.
They have far too much wealth and far too much power. And
notice again the people that they mention, and this is something I continue to stress to you. Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk. Again, those are the easy targets. Everybody is aware of them. Everybody is not aware of Larry Fink. Larry Fink, who owns BlackRock. So you have Larry Fink and you have BlackRock. They are more dangerous than Bill Gates, than Elon Musk, and Jeff Bezos. And Bernie Sanders won't call him out. And she won't call him out, the woman interviewing him. Do you guys see? You see how this really works? Nobody, they said BlackRock is what it says, the company that owns everything that most people have never heard of. That's the phrase that people say about BlackRock, right? You know why most people have never heard of them? Because people like Bernie Sanders, when they call out the rich, they don't mention them. When they call out corrupt corporations, they mention Amazon, they mention Walmart. They don't mention BlackRock. And we need to start asking why. The fact that BlackRock has shares in the media, the housing market, the fact that BlackRock can just go up and buy all these foreclosed homes from the 2008 housing crisis, and nobody wants to mention them. That's a good point, Miguel. They are scared of BlackRock. Do you see what I'm saying? They are misleading the American people. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates are not the people who are the most powerful. One of the most powerful people is Larry Fink, and they won't say his name. What that tells you about people like Bernie Sanders is that he's only willing to go so far. Even Bernie Sanders knows there is a line that he should not cross.
Danger is, let me talk about danger. And danger is when you have billionaires who can contribute unlimited amounts of money into the political process and elect the candidates that they want. That is dangerous.
But then you've got billionaires like Bill Gates. You could say what he's done for, medical development all over the world.
I know Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a nice guy, but still the point is he worth?
No, see, here's the thing again about the nice guy. So Bernie's going to tell you that Bill Gates is a nice guy. This is the same thing that he said about Joe Biden. I'm sorry, but nice guys don't steal people's water. Nice guys don't steal people's farmland. That's not nice. That's someone who's trying to make a profit. Bernie Sanders needs to call that out. Won't do it.
Is anybody, when you have, should we have a society with so much income and wealth inequality? This is not an attack. I say it in the book. It's not an attack on individuals. It's an attack on a system that allows for that inequality.
But you run in that same system. But you support that same system when you tell people that you're still supporting Joe Biden. You see, it's one thing to call out the problems, but it's another thing to go along with the problem. If Bernie Sanders knows that the system is the issue, why hasn't Bernie Sanders called for some type of mass movement of the people on the outside of electoral politics? If Bernie Sanders knows that the system is the problem, why does Bernie Sanders continue to back and support the politicians that are a part of that same system? Because at the end of the day, even Bernie Sanders he's not revolutionary. He's not. He has tricked people into thinking that he is. Real revolutionaries in this country were killed. Let's be real. Fred Hampton was killed. Malcolm X was killed. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. And those are just a few. The ones that you know about. If Bernie Sanders was a real revolutionary, Bernie Sanders would not be alive right now today. Let's make that very clear. Because I think we all know, it's all been revealed now, that the government agencies were responsible for killing the revolutionaries that we had in this country. And when they killed them, they killed the revolutionary energy that we had in this country. And then people were swept up and swept away with Reaganomics. When the revolutionaries died, that made way for neoliberalism.
One of America's big problems are guns. And yet you want to reform the Constitution, but you don't say anything about the Second Amendment. You don't say anything about getting rid of guns. Why
Because
should
the
it be
vast
like
majority
Canada?
of the people, no, we have people who hunt, people who do target practice, that's all. That's our culture. Your culture may be different. But the danger is that we have people who have guns who are often should not have guns. They are people who have been involved in domestic violence, mentally unstable. And what we have to do is have thorough background checks as to who owns guns.
When you wore mittens to the Biden inauguration, it caused a sensation.
And we're stopping there because the rest of that is not serious and not worth talking about, to be honest with you. Now, that's one interview. There was another interview where he was specifically asked about the 2024 election. People are misleading with this article, and people are not actually reading the article. I've seen this all over Twitter where people are just looking at the headline and getting excited. It says Bernie Sanders says Marianne Williamson will run a strong campaign and raise very important issues in 2024. And if you look on Twitter right now, you'll be able to tell the people who took this, ran with it, and didn't actually read the article. Let's go on. So there's Bernie, there's Marianne. Listen to this. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont offered tepid praise on Tuesday for Marianne Williamson's 2024 presidential campaign, telling Insider that he expected her to raise very important issues during the campaign. So notice it says here, he told Insider at the Capitol. That tells you that Insider has access to the politicians, because there have been other independent media outlets that have also been at the Capitol and have tried to interview Bernie Sanders, and he runs away from them. Let's go on. Williamson, a self-help author, spiritual leader, and 2020 presidential candidate, is currently the only well-known Democrat to officially launch a presidential campaign. President Joe Biden is widely expected to announce a re-election bid, but has yet to officially do so. Here's the clicker. Like, you didn't even have to go that far down the article to get to the point that a lot of people have missed on social media. Sanders has said he will support Biden if he seeks re-election, and told Insider on Tuesday that he doesn't want to speculate about Williamson's chances. But Williamson endorsed Sanders in 2020 after dropping out of the campaign, and he indicated a respect for her that other Democrats haven't shown. What does this tell you about Bernie Sanders? You see, a lot of people are retweeting that headline and they're leaving that piece out. So people are on Twitter and they're like, Bernie Sanders supports Marianne Williamson's campaign. So I go to the article and I read the article and I'm like, oh, you're just going to leave this piece out where he said that he will support Joe Biden? This is what people are doing right now. People aren't even taking the time to read. Some of them, I think, are doing it on purpose. Some of them, I think, may have read this and want to mislead people and want to hype up Marianne's campaign to make it seem like she has support from Bernie Sanders when she does not. Just because he said he thinks that she'll run a strong campaign doesn't mean he's going to endorse her over Joe Biden. And he's not. He already told you he's going to support Joe Biden. So you need to pay attention to this because you need to see who Bernie Sanders really is. And I say this because, again, it tells you right here, but Williamson endorsed Sanders in 2020 after dropping out of the campaign, which she did. And most candidates did not. So even though Marianne Williamson endorsed Bernie Sanders is not willing to repay the favor and endorse Marianne Williamson. How's that for you? What kind of friend is that? You see what I mean? Again, at the end of the day, he's only willing to go so far, and he knows there's a line that he's not supposed to cross. That's not stabbed in the back. That's stabbed in the front. He goes on to say, I know Marianne, I'm sure she's going to run a strong campaign and raise very important issues, but I'm still going to support Joe Biden. And like I said, if Medicare for all is his number one issue, why would Bernie Sanders support the candidate that does not support Medicare for all? If he really cared about everyone having health care in this country. Bernie Sanders made a lot of money during these presidential runs, and Bernie Sanders wrote another book, okay? Because at the end of the day, I feel like that's what this is all about. Let's go on. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, by contrast, was firm in her support for Biden when asked about Williamson's campaign. See how they try to phrase this? Was firm in her support. Bernie was firm in his support too. You just heard him in the video. He goes on to say, I think that President Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee and he's going to get reelected. Now that's coming from Elizabeth Warren. So again, people are looking at this headline and they're running with it all over Twitter. People were so excited. Yay! Oh my God, I can't believe it. This is great. This is fantastic. Didn't even read the article. An insider knows that. That's why they chose that title. I'll take the comments on Rockfin, Eric. Okay. Excuse me, guys. I'm a little stuffy tonight. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. What Peter said about the flood is exactly what an Uber customer from North Dakota told me. He didn't know the reason why. I had to educate him on what he has but didn't know about. And thank you for this tip as well. Ellen Brown, founder of the Public Banking Institute, authored From Austerity to Prosperity, the Public Banking Solution. Thanks so much for that, Roger. I think I'm supposed to reach out to her. I think that's someone that's on my list to reach out to. Yeah, I think so. Okay, let me go to some of the comments here and then we will go to the next story. Thanks for the super chat, Frank. The 2008 crash started with Indy Mac in Cali. Was the largest bank in California at the time. Same thing is happening again. You guys hear this? Thank you for the super chat, Reverend Edmund Bolella. Thank you for your work and public witness. Thank you. Sean says, I remember that video of how much better women were treated. So Sean, you were with me back then. So you remember, yeah, we went through a whole breakdown of how life changed for women in Afghanistan after U.S. intervention. James says, money in government is the reason people can buy privilege and power. Bernie. There you go. Okay, let's get into this next story here. This is a rather quick story, but it's good news. I told you about this a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, maybe like 2 weeks ago, that there were activists here in Boston that were fighting for rent control. They were saying, bring it back. Like we had it here before. You took it away in the 90s. We want you to bring it back because the rent is too damn high. It just is what it is. It's too much for a lot of people now. Well, they actually got support from Mayor Michelle Wu for this project as well. And so she actually worked with Boston city councilors to try to make this a reality. And now this news broke. A monumental act. Boston City Council advances Mayor Wu's rent control plan to the State House. So this is huge, you guys. Like, I did not expect this to move that fast, but it did. Let's get into this. The Boston City Council voted to advance Mayor Michelle Wu's rent stabilization plan to state lawmakers on Wednesday, jumping the first legislative hurdle for a proposal seeking to cap rent increases in the city to a maximum of 10%. So this was the most difficult part, was getting it through the council. So you have to get it through the council first to even get it to the state house. So now all eyes will be on you, state representatives. We will be looking at you, because if this don't pass, we'll know who to point fingers to. Let's go on. Councilors voted 11-2 to pass the home rule petition, which, if enacted, would limit year-over-year rent hikes to the change in the consumer price index plus 6% or 10% at most. Whichever of the two figures is lower, the act would impact an estimated 56% of all rental units in Boston, or some 185,000 dwellings. Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, chairman of the Government Operations Committee, the body that considered the proposal in recent weeks, called the plan a monumental act for the city of Boston. Although councilors have heard from some residents and advocates who say the measures do not go far enough, and I just want to echo that, it should go further, but this is a step. To rein in the city's expensive rental market, Arroyo says he considers the limit proposed are a compromise number. Unfortunately, we heard stories of individuals who've had 100% price increases, 200% price increases, 80, 90% price increases. And I understand that for some, 10% doesn't go far enough. And in most cases, I would agree. But for those individuals, this would have been a large bomb on a problem that led to them either seeking new housing, home insecurity, or being put on the street. And I want to add something here about these 200% increases that some people did receive. The reason why they were able to do that, the landlords, is because Boston does not have rent stabilization. So we didn't have rent control. They removed that in the 90s, but we also don't have rent stabilization. And that means that the landlords can increase the rent as much as they want. And that's what's been happening. And I've had friends go through this as well. They get an apartment. They can only be there for a year because the landlord hikes up the rent so high. So then they have to move out and find a cheaper apartment to live in. It's annoying and it's aggravating. And it also hurts the attempt for people to build community, because if you're constantly having to move to a different Boston neighborhood because the landlords keep increasing the rent, where's your sense of community there? People become permanent renters and apartment hoppers. That's what happens. The council vote comes nearly 3 decades after voters across Massachusetts opted to ban rent control laws in 1994. The vote was one of the 2 legislative victories for Wu on Wednesday, as the council voted 11-2 to advance the mayor's home run rule petition pertaining to another campaign promise. That was one of her promises, restructuring the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Today, the city council delivered a strong message that the city of Boston needs the tools to address our housing crisis. We hear from residents across every single neighborhood just how dire it is, and we see families who are getting pushed out of the communities that they grew up in and helped to build. Wu said the core of the policy protects against extreme, unaffordable rent increases. Most of Boston's good landlords are already not boosting rent by more than 10% a year. This proposal would stop the most harmful of situations that we see playing out across our neighborhoods, where community members and residents have their rents doubled and increased by 50% in a way that is extremely unpredictable and simply unsustainable. This was actually one of the measures that Marty Walsh had promised. He had promised that he was going to build more affordable housing units in Boston. That didn't happen. All you saw were more condos, all these boxy condos. You know, you go to every city looks the same now. because they have the same boxy condo, and it takes away the character and some of the culture in the neighborhood. And it's a problem. It's a big problem. Although the council votes were significant steps for the city, the approval process is all but over. Home rule petitions require sign off from the state legislature and the governor to become law. So our eyes will be looking at the state legislator, and we will also look at our new governor, which is Maura Healey. So if it does not pass, you'll know why. We'll all know who to blame. But it's a small step. It's a small step. But we'll see what happens from here. Oh, there's one more piece here. I'm sorry. This piece right here. Wu plans to provide several exemptions to the law, including for owner-occupied properties with 6 units or fewer, properties where the owner and tenant share bathrooms or kitchens, and for new apartment buildings and developments for the first 15 years after the city issues a certificate of occupancy. Landlords would also be able to set their rents back to the market rate between tenancies. The home rule petition would establish other renters' protection too, such as allowing the city to put in place just cause eviction regulations. Those measures would allow tenants to only be evicted for cause, from failure to pay rent to substantial lease violations. Additionally, the city would be able to create a rent board where renters could appeal their cases before heading to housing court. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, but I'll keep you posted. I'll take the comment on Rockfin, Eric. Food by the rocks that I got. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. My personal links to my Dropbox of what I compiled on Public Bank's short form. Thanks so much for that, Roger. Eric, when you have time, if you can copy those links and put that in the chat. And thank you for this tip as well. The following link shows you how to make a public bank airtight. Sabby, can you put this link in the 4 links in the previous Rockfins in the YouTube chat for people to peep out? Let's keep this education campaign for public banks going. Thank you so much for that. Make sure I go to the comments here. American Idol says, America provides so many opportunities to starve, fall through the cracks, and lose everything. Eric says, need to build more housing. And let's make sure the housing is not more luxury condos. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of it. You can't go 1 block now without seeing another luxury apartments for rent. Violin says they found a way to profit on leaving the housing empty. There you go. Russell Brand. I like Russell Brand. I think he's a pretty cool dude. Talks about a lot of interesting things. Now, he's someone that does talk about BlackRock. He's someone that does call out mainstream media. He's not afraid to do so. And because of that, Russell Brand is now being smeared. They're coming after him now. I told you, once you get to the point where you start to talk about the class issue, you start to talk about, let's not maybe focus on left and right. Let's focus on the top and the bottom. Let's focus on the billionaires. Let's focus on the people who have all this money versus the people who don't. That's when they're going to come for you. And Russell got by for a bit, but now they have come after him. But luckily, he does have someone to come to his defense. Now, Glenn Greenwald actually talked about this recently, about how people are coming after Russell Brand now because of some of the comments that he made recently on Bill Maher's show, calling out BlackRock, calling out MSNBC, calling the media corporate and corrupt. And so because he chose to focus on corruption and greed and the class issue, all of a sudden now, apparently, that is the definition for right wing. I kid you not. I'm not making it up. Glenn gets into it. Let's check it out.
So listen to these arguments that they cite as proof that Russell Brand is now on the far right. Quote, Russell Brand can't make up his own mind. Speaking on the comedian Bill Maher's talk show last weekend, Brand launched into a tinny rant that encompassed every right-wing signaling trope. Every right-wing signaling trope he expressed on Bill Maher's show. What are these right-wing signaling tropes? According to the new statement, quote, number one, the ghoulish mainstream media. So if you dislike the mainstream media, if you don't trust them, if you think they're corrupt, the corporate media, you are now expressing a right-wing trope.
And why is that important? Because who else is doing that? Who else is calling out mainstream media right now? Matt Taibbi. Why do you guys think all these people are smearing Matt Taibbi now as right-wing? Even people who call themselves progressive. You have progressive podcasters calling Matt Taibbi right-wing. That includes Majority Report, Humanist Report. I told you a long time ago before these people were just Democrats. They're out there actually praising Debbie Weiserman Schultz for the way that she handled Matt Taibbi. They're praising the same woman who was a part of the DNC. They're praising her and commending her over Matt Taibbi, who's an actual journalist. That's how far gone people are now. That's how far gone they are. You see what I mean? When you start to call out corruption and you call out greed and you tell people, well, the focus is on the security, these government agencies censoring people on Twitter. I don't know why I said it like that. Twitter. Censoring people, having their hand in multiple social media platforms, that includes Facebook as well, is problematic. Matt Taibbi wrote a book called Hate Inc., where he called out the media. Matt Taibbi wrote a book called Griftopia, where he talked about the 2008 financial crisis. And a lot of the people implicated in that book were Democrats. So he's not going to be their cup of tea. And so someone that calls himself an old school liberal, now all of a sudden they're smearing him as right wing. You see how this works? Because they were fine with him as long as he was on that Bernie train. They were totally fine with Matt Taibbi then. But now, because he's bringing out evidence from the Twitter files that does criticize the Democrats, now all of a sudden he's right wing. And now they're doing it to Russell Brand. So if you call the media corrupt, apparently now all of a sudden you're right wing. Let's go on.
That the media, the corporate media, is bad. The next one, quote, the dishonest and untrustworthy pharmaceutical industry. If you distrust or harbor suspicion of Big Pharma, Pfizer, and the rest, that is now proof that you are on the far right. You're spreading far right tropes. The next one, quote, the West's shameful treatment of Julian Assange and scarecrow American hero Edward Snowden. So if you believe that Edward Snowden and Julian Assange are heroic for having revealed secrets showing that the U.S. security state committed war crimes and lied to the public and spied on them en masse with no warrants, and if you oppose the persecution of those two whistleblowers and journalists, in the case of Julian Assange, that too means that you're somehow now on the far right. If you like...
This is a problem. This is a problem, people. And I've received those smears as well. Like when I spoke at the Assange rally, people were like, oh no, Sabby's right wing now. I'm like, what are you talking about? What is happening? I thought lefties were supposed to be for free speech. I thought lefties were supposed to be anti-censorship. But that is what's happening. This is the smear they're throwing at everybody now. Everybody now. See, they're totally fine with you when you only criticize the right. They love you. If I came on here and I talked about Trump all the time, who's not president, if I came on here all the time and I talked about Trump, Matt Gaetz, MTG, Lauren Boebert, if I came on here and I talked about Ben Shapiro and Dave Rubin and Candace Owens, they'd love me. But the moment you start to criticize the Democrats, especially if you do a little too much for them, now you're right wing.
Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and opposed their imprisonment by the West, you're now on the far right. And the last one was, quote, the COVID drug ivermectin. In other words, if you question the pronouncements of the same health authorities that we just showed you systemically, deliberately lied to the public, you're also now on the far right. No distrusting health officials, no protecting whistleblowers who expose the crimes of the security state, no distrusting big pharma, and most of all, no suspicion of the corporate media. Anything that you do that expresses those views, according to this new Statesman article, places you on the far right. These are far right tropes.
Isn't this terrible? Isn't this terrible? This is why I continue to tell people the Democratic Party is still right wing. And they've moved further and further. So when people say that Joe Biden is moving further to the left, the Democratic Party is moving further to the left, that is a lie. All you have to do is look at the policies. Look at the way the Democratic Party, the Democrat politicians were treating Matt Taibbi in that hearing. It's just like Debbie Weiserman Schultz mad at him because he's makes money. Like, you're not supposed to get paid for your work, apparently. The language that you would expect to hear come from the Democratic Party, it's not there. It's not there. They protect the police state. They protect the corporations. They protect mainstream media. And they're pro-censorship now. It's crazy, but it's happening. That's not moving further to the left.
Even though the article acknowledges, quote, he then pivoted leftward and rounded off his angry sermon with an endorsement for Bernie Sanders. That's exactly right. Russell Brand continues and always has supported Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. They acknowledge that, and yet he's nonetheless on the far right because he dislikes the mainstream media, Big Pharma, and the persecution of Edward Snowden and Julian Assange.
But this is something they've been doing to people who were previous Bernie Sanders supporters. They've been doing this to some of us that backed Bernie in 2020, 2016. They're now saying that, oh, those people are right wing. That's what they've been doing to people now. They're doing it on Twitter too. It's like, if you were okay with Bernie back then, but you have criticism of Bernie Sanders now, immediately, oh, you're right wing. It reminds me of that time when Meghan McCain on The View, this is back when I used to watch The View, Meghan McCain on The View said that if you vote for Bernie, you're voting for Donald Trump because Bernie is Trump. So you see that idea was already planted inside people's heads before the smears started happening on Twitter. Mainstream media, they used The View outlets to plant that idea in people's heads that if you supported Bernie Sanders, you were basically supporting Donald Trump. So the idea of these Bernie supporters or past Bernie supporters possibly being secret right wing, that idea was planted in your head by mainstream media. And here we are today.
Let me look at one more part of this article, because actually we're going to look at two more. Here's another one that essentially says that if you're somebody who distrusts the U.S. security state and the U.S. posture of endless war and the motives for why the United States keeps going to war, then that too makes you on the far right. Quote, as for any self-styled alternative media.
Yeah, I just wanted to say here, and I'll let him finish, even those who are calling for peace people who are calling for peace between Russia and Ukraine, they're smearing those people as far right too. I got smeared as far right because I went to that, the call for peace rally, and people are like, "Oh, you're far right now." I'm like, for peace? Terrible thing.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine is a central theme of inquiry. Brand quotes long passages of text from Substacks about the true intentions of Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton. He suggests it is a proxy war fought with the ultimate ambition of privatizing Ukraine. When he shouts about the military-industrial complex intentionally generating a state of perpetual crisis, he means it. Brand is not just paranoid about intervention, he's actively conspiratorial about it. So if you are now somebody who opposes or questions the motives of Western wars, if you think that maybe there's an economic motive to why the U.S. continually finds reasons to fuel wars and to purchase large amounts of armaments, the way every single person on the left in 2002 was claiming about Dick Cheney's reason to go to war in Iraq, that it would help Halliburton. If you now are somebody who thinks there's a military-industrial complex that generates perpetual war in order to satisfy economic motives, or suspicious about the reasons they're giving, if you don't really believe that they're fighting wars to safeguard democracy and vanquish authoritarianism, then now you too are on the far right. That places you on the far right. That's another view that, if you believe, means you're a fascist.
Yep, that's what they're doing. And I want to bring it back to 2002 in the Iraq War, because I just thought about Barbara Lee. Let's remember, Barbara Lee was one of the politicians. I think it was her and Bernie, but she was the Democrat politician that opposed the war in Iraq, like before it started, when they said that we're going to war with Iraq. Barbara Lee opposed that, and she's a Democrat. Now, what I want to mention is it seems like it's okay to do that when at the time the party leadership that controlled the White House was Republican. So George W. Bush was president during that time. But what I have noticed is that when the party leadership that controls the House is the Democratic Party, right now, Joe Biden, and you still try to have those same beliefs, you're smeared as right wing. A lot of it comes down to who the leadership is at that point in time. It's okay for Democrats to be anti-war when Trump is president, but it's not okay for Democrats to be anti-war when Biden is president. And this is a big part of the problem with partisan politics.
Now, that then concludes, let's look at this last one here. It says, whatever it is, Brand has internalized assumptions generated by a brand of heterodox American, Joe Rogan, Glenn Greenwald, Tucker Carlson. These are the people who have manipulated Russell Brand, have lured him out of leftism and convinced him to become a far rightist like us, myself, Joe Rogan, and Tucker Carlson, even while he clings to a veneer of old-fashioned British socialism. But perhaps that tension is not as awkward as it seems.
Let's highlight Joe Rogan here for just a second, because I want to point something out. I want to remind everyone, remember, Joe Rogan also supported Bernie Sanders. I expect them to mention Tucker Carlson, but every time they try to slide in Joe Rogan's name there as like right wing, I'm like, Joe Rogan also supported Bernie Sanders. Let's go on.
The soul of Corbynism, for example, is the argument that a cabal of elite capitalists have manipulated the system against the everyman. Quote, they've stitched up our political system to protect the powerful, the former labor leader said in early 2017, to line the pockets of their friends. There are few journalists in the United States who talk more about the rigged system than Tucker Carlson. It is exactly the mode of politics Brand trades in too.
See, this is what they don't want you to do. They don't want you to call out the powerful. They don't want you to call out the corruption. They don't want you to call out problems with capitalism. See, if you can stay in that lane where you can talk about it a little bit, but not to the point where you're saying things like both of these parties are corporate, they're both corrupt. They don't want to rock with you when you do that. then they see you as a problem. But if you just call out the Republicans, you'll be okay with them.
And then here's the key revelation that they stumble into. Perhaps the two movements are not as uneasy bedfellows as they appear. In other words, perhaps the way to look at this is not left versus right anymore, or Republican versus Democrat, but instead people who trust global institutions of authority, the Pentagon, the U.S. security state, Big Pharma, the military-industrial complex.
And the Pentagon right now can't even tell you where their money went. They failed their audit multiple times in a row. But some people think we should trust them. That's so funny.
CIA versus people who distrust those institutions. And that there are a lot of populists on the left and the right who now find common ground because they stand in opposition to these globalist institutions and distrust their integrity and their motives and believe that they do more harm than good. It kind of stumbles into the truth that the most important framework is no longer these archaic labels of left and right, but whether you question these global institutions of power and whether you stand in favor of or opposed to authoritarian measures.
It's the people who call out the real power. That is when they come with the far right smears. Let's go ahead and do a quick like check, guys. Go ahead and smash that like button. That helps me out with the algo. See, I remembered to say that tonight. You guys should be proud of me. I'm getting better with that.
Like having big tech form a union with the government to censor the internet, or having the Pentagon and the U.S. security state dictate to big tech whether dissent to wars is permitted. I agree that is the much more relevant framework now that this article inadvertently stumbles into. But of course it can't concede that, because like most traditional media outlets, this magazine only understands the world through these very labels of left versus right, Labor versus Tory, Democrat versus Republican. And so they need to cling on to this. And so they end with this smearing of Brand's reputation, this kind of very lazy way to try and discredit him. Quote, "But one thing is abundantly clear. Brand is fighting the American culture wars from a shed in Oxfordshire. His demand to be taken seriously is a rather weak one."
He has over 6 million subscribers, so apparently he's taken seriously by a great amount of people. Like he has more subscribers than TYT last time I checked. So apparently he is taken seriously by quite many.
It's like a very just lazy way to conclude the article, after essentially acknowledging that there's good reason why people like Russell Brand now have a lot in common with right-wing populists. Because people on the left and right have come to the same conclusion about these gigantic institutions of authority, that they're corrupt and should be opposed. They then have to just discredit him as being on the far right, as being some rich elite who has no grounds for saying any of this, because they can't allow people to realize that they want to keep separate with these labels, that in fact we have a lot more common ground than they want us to realize.
That part is incredibly important. I think that people should really understand the left is pushing away its own people. All because some of it's because of personalities too. It's like you like this person or you retweeted this person. I don't want you around. Like, okay. It's such a weird space. It's such a weird space. I'm telling you, everybody was with you when you were on the Bernie train. But the moment that train stopped and you realize this system is not designed for someone like Bernie Sanders to actually get in there, and if he got in there, the system is still not designed for him to implement those progressive policies. And once you realize that and you got off the train, people don't want to deal with you. They see you as a problem. This is why they smear people like this. Now, I want to show you some of the things that Russell Brand has said recently so you'll understand why people are smearing him. So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. This is an example of Russell Brand calling out both political parties. Listen to this.
Now, listen, during that pandemic period, billionaires added $5 trillion to their fortunes. That means that during the pandemic, a new billionaire was created every single day, while extreme poverty increased everywhere, while small businesses closed everywhere. Now, I'm going to say something on Fox News that until recently would not have been possible. As president, Donald Trump's tax cuts helped billionaires pay less taxes than the working class in 2018. For the first time in American history, the 400 wealthiest people paid a lower tax rate than any other group. But check this out, Fox News viewers, because you're going to like this bit. In October 2021, Democrats scaled back plans for a crackdown on tax cheating, bowing to an aggressive lobbying campaign by the banking industry, while Joe Biden told rich donors on the campaign trail that nothing would fundamentally change if he were elected president. So like some of the great points in your monologue,
So what he just did there is he called out how both Trump and Biden, in the end, did not implement tax policies that helped out the working class. He mentioned both of them. He started off with Trump and went ahead and warned them, yeah, sorry, Fox crowd, you're probably not going to like me saying this, but here we go. And then he also said, but also Joe Biden did this. They don't like when you do that. The powers that be don't like you to call out both.
reference I was a bit like Rasputin, although he was a pretty crazy, sexy guy. You made the point that it's the two-party system itself, and in particular the manner in which it is funded, that prevents meaningful change for ordinary people. And this education problem, while the jokes you made were about the culture, Kardashians, etc., really, education, if the state has a duty at all, is the cultivation of young Americans, it is the protection of young Americans. This would be my point, Greg Gutfeld. Very good, very good. Look at that.
So again, he says again, the two-party system.
Edit out about the last 2 minutes of that.
No! That was the best bit! Let me tether it to some promo. Why not watch Fox News and other affiliated stations within News International? Now you can just use that. There we go.
He asked him if he could edit out the last 2 minutes of that, because he's like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, you criticized Trump and you called out both parties. Now, they also bring up the part here. I don't know if everyone saw that full interview of that panel, but they also bring up the part here where Russell Brand is smeared or they try to smear him as being right wing. Listen to this. Again, shout out to Case Study QB for this clip.
Have you been shunned since you've kind of transformed yourself?
Well, is it odd that the last time you and I interacted, albeit remotely and using too many expletives, you were calling me Marxist scum.
Right.
Now I'm a right-wing conspiracy theorist, and I feel like I'm saying the same thing, that centralized establishment power is a problem, that no one's doing enough to advance the.
So that's important. He said 1 minute he's called a Marxist, the next minute he's being called right-wing. So obviously you can't be a Marxist and be right wing at the same time. And he's saying the same thing. So this is what I was saying before. His rhetoric has not changed. He's still speaking the same. The only difference is the party administration in the White House has changed. That is what has changed. And that's why some people, especially those who are Democrats, are freaking out.
Albeit remotely and using too many expletives. You were calling me Marxist scum.
Right.
Now I'm a right-wing conspiracy theorist, and I feel like I'm saying the same thing, that centralized establishment power is a problem, that no one's doing enough to advance the interests of ordinary people. We need more democracy, not less, maximum power in our community, maximum amount of individual freedom. I think the difference for me, Greg Gutfeld, if I may say, is that my principles are derived from a faith in God. And you cannot love God and not at least operate in good faith in your dealings with other people, that you have to move beyond contempt of the opinions of other people that you are involved with. You have to be engaged in conversation sort of lovingly and openly. I remember continually, because I'm a stand-up comedian, that I don't know more than other people about their lives and their suffering, and there'll be reasons that they have their perspectives and point of view.
I just wanted to add in here this part where he brought in spirituality. I think this is something that Dr. West can appreciate as well. You know, it's that when you do have some type of, you know, spirituality, doesn't necessarily have to be Christian. Just want to make that out there. But when you do have that type of connection, then it's like the way you see the world, you see it through that lens. So you realize that, like, for those of you who are Christian, for example, you realize that, like, technically, if you have read the Bible, technically Jesus was a socialist. Because Jesus wouldn't say, would Jesus say that immigrants shouldn't come here? No. Would Jesus say that you should lock kids up in cages at the border? No. Jesus would probably say you shouldn't even have any borders. These are things people to think about. If you have read the Bible, you will see there's multiple times throughout the Bible where it was preached to help your neighbor, to give people food, to take care of each other as a community. So I think that's important for people to hear when you listen to what Russell just said, because through his spirituality, he's able to look at things in a different way. And I think Dr. West has talked about this as well. So has Chris Hedges. Like they just see things differently because of that.
And I think that, like you said in your monologue, other than those rude bits about me and Rasputin and all that stuff, you made the point that it was important for us to remain open to one another, to not close our mind. And in the clip that you showed 3 years ago, and like Kat was just saying, that binary thinking, it reduces our ability to analyze various perspectives. So I'm here because you made them jokes at the beginning, like about being a movie star and all that kind of stuff. I was not fulfilled by that life in particular. I'm from an ordinary background. I don't dress like it because I've got a little sexy thing called style. But I'm from Essex in England. That's New Jersey, essentially, so that you understand it, because you're American.
It smells better than New Jersey.
It smells about the same. Those of aftershave, but over body odor. And for me, what I'm interested in is open conversations with a variety of people. I feel like the obvious thing is not a culture war, but a culture truce. To allow people to live traditional lifestyles if they want to, progressive lifestyles if they want to. Why are we arguing about this anymore? It can't ever be one centralized system of authority that has the right to oppress any group of people on the basis of their personal, cultural, racial identity. But all the while this is happening, we're not addressing the significant, important economic issues that mean that many, many people are suffering unduly. There you go.
Well said. Very well said. But the part there where he says he feels like he's saying the same thing, that's also something that Jimmy Dore has said multiple times. If you go back and you watch Jimmy Dore's videos when he was still a part of TYT, he was saying the same thing. He had the same amount of, energy, and he was saying the same thing. So when people make statements that like, oh, Jimmy Dore is totally right wing now, sound like he's saying the same thing to me that he was saying on TYT. But again, what was the difference? He was on the Bernie train. So some of the people that were on that train didn't like it when you got off the train. And how dare anyone criticize King Bernie? That's how some people act. I'm not trying to be funny, but some people act like Bernie Sanders is a freaking king or a god. But that is what's happening, people. That's what's happening there, ladies and gentlemen. It's silly. It's ridiculous. But for those of you who are not on Twitter, if you were on Twitter, you would see it. It happens a lot on there. Sebastian says, it's worse within the LGBTQ community. I'm gay and I've been banned by other LGBT plus people for pointing out that there's an ongoing class war and why we can't trust big pharma. JB has talked about that as well, Sebastian. James says, Russell Brand is authentic left, not fake left. Jean says, notice they only attacked the journalist's character and never asked about the facts. Yep. Thank you for the super chat, radical leftist extremists. The only tactic they have is bullying. If you don't blank, then you're a blank. And just wait for it, guys, because I'm going to give this breakdown on Sunday. Just wait for it, because it's just 2023. Next year is going to be wild, because there's going to be a lot of people that are attacking us now. Next year, when the races actually start to take off, a lot of people are going to be mad at us because we're going to tell you not to get on these trains. Sebastian says, what was life like in 2002? How old are you, Sebastian? It was an interesting time. Interesting time, because we had 9/11 and then went into the Iraq war. I didn't have a smartphone. I don't even think smartphones were around back then. There was no Facebook, by the way. No Facebook, no Twitter. None of that jazz. It was different without social media, I'll be honest. Romina says, remember the Dixie Chicks blacklisted? It's the same thing, just now those in power have blue hat, not a red one. Yes. They really did the Dixie Chicks wrong. They canceled the Dixie Chicks, and they were actually canceled, by the way. I know other people say so-and-so's canceled. No, the Dixie Chicks were canceled. They couldn't get gigs for like a decade. People were stomping on their CDs. Like, venues didn't want to book them because they criticized the Iraq war, and they're from Texas, and George W. Bush was president at that time, and that's his state. Even other country musicians were attacking them. Toby Keith, he was one of them. Lorez says, Sabby, I just searched Russell Brand right wing here on YouTube, and there's a lot already. See, there you go. Whoever, Jesus was on Rome's level. I'm going to tell Rome you said this, whoever. Jesus was on Rome's level. Jesus was a based communist. I am a straight up Bible scholar. And thank you for the super chat, Billy D. Jesus was a radical revolutionary. There you go. All right, I'll take the comment on Rockfin. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Sabby, this has nothing to do with believing in and standing by principle. These people are nothing but team players playing team politics. I'm for my team no matter what. Is it any coincidence? This is mild gang warfare. Bloods red versus Crips blue. GOP red versus Dems blue. We are an outside threat that they can't wrap their heads around, so they do lazy labeling. Indies are more of a threat than third party. Interesting. And thank you for this tip, Jim. Here's $5, Sabby. Great show once again. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okie doke. Now, oopsie. Oh, did I miss? Oh, thank you for this as well, Roger. Sab evangelical. Sab evangelicals, Christians don't go by Christ because they're Old Testament Christians, not New Testament. Think about it. When do the Jimmy Falwell type ever talk about Jesus? It is mostly God, the Lord. Yes, Doors said the same thing. That's why they ran him out of there. We need you all to put all these policies up as CBIs in 2024. Smart 4s came about in 2007. Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I didn't remember smartphones being around in 2002. But thank you, Xavier. Thank you. Appreciate that. So tomorrow I will be at the Boston launch for Workers Strike Back. So I will be there. I'll get there a little late actually, because I have a debate right before that. It's not going to be on my channel. In fact, you won't even see the debate until that conference is announced in June. So I have that, and that was booked a while back. And then I'll be going straight from the debate to Workers Strike Back. So I'll be there for a little bit, and I hope to see some of you there if you're in the area. We talked about possibly live streaming. We're not going to live stream the event. I think we're going to try to record, because and then post it as a premiere, just because we try not to stream live the same time. So I try not to stream live while RBN is streaming live. So and they do have Jimmy Doors coming on to RBN tomorrow with Nick and CJ. So we're gonna try to see if we can record it. Eric will probably be there before me because, like I said, I'll be running late. But we'll try to see if we can record it, and then I can upload it as a premiere, possibly Sunday. So yeah. What's that, Frank? What kind of debate? So I'm actually going to be debating Norm Finkelstein. I talked about that conversation that he had with Aaron Mate when he said that white people were just a smidge above black people. And I was like, nah, but I was like, economically, we got to have a talk. We got to have a talk. But someone else actually put this together, not me. And they reached out to both of us. So yeah. Yeah. And for me, like, I'm not looking for an argument. I just want to discuss the data. You know, I have a lot of data that proves that economically that is not true. So other than that, guys, I am donezo. I'm out of here. So I'm not live tomorrow. I'll be back live Sunday. I believe I'm going live at 5 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday. Sunday is also daylight savings time. So I just want to remind everybody now, because I was reminded today. But yeah, I get tired of daylight savings time. I wish they could just keep it as it is. You know, I don't know. Just keep it as it is. I don't like this spring forward and fall back. I don't want to spring. I don't want to fall. It just is what it is. All right, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me tonight. I am heading out. So have a good night. Keep up the fight.